The Wind Beyond the Mountains by Harlan Ellison. Under its original title, Savage Wind, this story was first published in the January 1957 issue of Amazing Stories magazine. In 1962, it was re-edited by the author for his collection of short stories called Ellison Wonderland, and this newer version also appeared in another collection of his tales called Earthman Go Home in 1964. Next was another magazine appearance in the September 1974 issue of Science Fiction Adventures. From here on, the Ellison Wonderland collection has had multiple reissues, and it is this version which will be read today. Read by Darrell T. Smith II for my channel, Quasar Spectra. The Wind Beyond the Mountains. It is down in the book of the ancestors with truth. The Ruskind know but one home. Ruska is home, for home shall be where the heart is. The stars are not for the Ruskind, for they know too that the heart is where the home is. Wummel saw the shining thing come down. He watched it from the stand of gnarl bushes as the pointed thing flamed across the sky, streaking toward the red sun. It flashed brightly above the land and disappeared quickly. Wummel found himself shaking. His pointed face quivered, and his split tongue slipped in and out of his mouth nervously. It had not been a bird. That was obvious, nor a beast of the land. Whatever it had been, it stirred a strange sensation in him, as though he were seeing a long-missing brother returning from across the mountain passes, coming home finally after a long, long absence. But that could not be. This metal thing he had never seen before, yet he could not shake the feeling. Wummel, for the first time in a life marked by terrors, was totally frightened. He crouched, his triple-jointed legs crossed beneath him. He watched the sky. If the flaming thing was to make another appearance, he would be there to see it when it reappeared. He had not long to wait. The sun had slipped across the pale blotch of gray sky when the thing appeared again. The thing dipped as it approached the forest and banked down toward the rising yellow feather tops of the trees. In a few moments, Wummel saw the falling thing point its sharp beak into the trees and disappear through the foliage. A muted roaring came to Wummel's hornbell ears, and a ropey pillar of angry smoke twisted up into the late afternoon sky. The roaring grew in violence, then suddenly ceased. The semi-silence of the forest dropped down again as though it had never been shattered. The swip, swip, swip of the forest crickets resumed. The cough and growl of the land beasts took up from its echo. A yellow-striped prowl cat slipped through the trees at the edge of the clearing. The wind whistled softly in among the yellow feather tops, and the forest looked as it had always looked. Only Wummel, of all the Ruskind, knew the thing had come, knew the forest was not as it had always been. And he turned immediately, scuttling off on digger fingers and triple-jointed legs, to tell the Ruskind. He might have sent the message by thought to the One who would have told the Ruskind, but somehow this message had to be delivered personally. He disappeared through the undergrowth. In the forest, there was movement from the thing that had ceased to flame. "Sellers, dispatch your crew into that section of the forest over there. See if you can find anything of the creatures who built that village. Galen, I'd like you to take the flit. Be careful now, and check if those mountains we saw are inhabited. Let's make this a thorough one, boys. It's a last one before home." He fitted the picture of a spaceman, tall, bronzed from many suns, wide and blocky hands, altogether able hands that commanded with ease. eyes blue as the seas over which he had flown, a mouth that spoke sharply but bore no grudge, a man with lines of character in his face, not a blank mold of a face that smiled and made sounds, but a face that had been the home of sadness and hard times, a man who had grown tired but never beaten, searching for an ideal. "This survey has to be really good, Charlie," the captain said to his first. "There's talk back home about too much for appropriations for the mapping command. They may swallow us into the mercantile guild systems. That wouldn't be so hot." He spoke earnestly, and there was a depth to his words. The first mate wanted badly to touch this man, to lay a hand on his arm and say, "We'll make it, Vern," or something less trite, but he could not. Instead, he remarked, "You look tired, Vern. Catch much during the last leg?" The captain shook his head and grinned broadly, though the weariness was moving in his eyes. "You know me, Charlie. No wink, no blink, no nod Kovacic, they called me at the academy." Then, the jibe still moist on his lips, he sobered. "Bring something back, Charlie. Bring it back. We need it bad. We need something to open their eyes back home, to make them understand we're not just idly flitting around the galaxy, that we can bring back useful information. We have to keep the command in business. It was 30 years coming, Charlie. Be a hell of a note to lose it now." "We need it, Charlie," he added softly, almost to himself, as he turned away. "Need it bad." They came clumping through the forest, 19 of them, walking strangely. They moved erect, with their hands swinging at their sides. Their hands were even different. How could they dig without spade-shaped fingers? How could they hear from those odd little flat things so close to their heads? Their eyes, such strange eyes, mere angry slits. The eyes watching the strange ones were not slits. They were huge, platter-like organs without lids. They watched unblinking as the strangers from the flaming thing tromped through the forest. They were going to the village home. The thought went out from the one to the other Ruskind. "Be careful, my children. They seem to bode no harm, but they are not of Ruska. They are not the Ruskind, not of the land, nor of the sea, nor of the air we know. Be careful." Wummel heard the thought and hunkered deeper under the spread roots of the gnarl bush. Yet there was something about these strange erect wanderers that drew him. "Is it because I saw them first?" he wondered. "Or is it something else? I sense a deeper bond in these strange ones. They are not wholly unknown to me." He reached out daintily, searching with his mind, plucking delicately as though on some fragile musical instrument. A stirring of buried racial memory, a common germ, a flame, a whirling nebula, and a throwing out of flashing arms. One parent, one world, so far back even the concept had been drowned by memory on memory. He watched their progress deeper into the mingled tree shapes. The forest held many of Wummel's people. The Ruskind had left the village home till the strange ones left the planet. His eager eyes caught the every flicker of their bodies, the every tread of their step, the every thought of their minds. A wild, conflicted, and confused something as rolled and entwined as the slender stringer arms of the Sulin vines. Their minds were never at rest. They could not speak between each other in thoughts, and they struggled in the cages of their bodies to communicate. Occasionally, one would move its mouth at the other, and a fraction of the real communication would be understood. There was a wandering in them. They were never at rest. Their lives were meshes of step and run and scamper. never at peace, never at rest, always driven on, always driven on. Father, the thought blossomed, I want to follow them. I want to listen more to them. Thought returned, be careful, my son. They caught him in the village. They had been studying the thatchy hutches when the first mate had seen him. He had been watching them from the edge of the forest, and the first caught the movement of his green fur from the corner of his eye. He had dispatched men to circle the thing, and they had closed in on it carefully. It had started to scamper away when they were a good 20 feet from it, but the enmeshing action of the power-driven elastic cord in their molasses guns had trapped it. The little thing lay still as they picked him up, warped into a small furry ball with the adhesive elastic cord wound about him in many twistings. They carried him out of the forest and laid him before the first mate. It lay still even as they surrounded him. It stared up out of saucer-sized yellow eyes, and the green, smooth fur of its flanks quivered under their gaze. Is it animal, vegetable, or... One of the non-coms began, but the first mate cut him off with a wave of the hand. Do you feel anything? The others shook their heads, but the first noticed one man whose eyes had clouded, whose brow was furrowed with lines of concentration, as though he were listening for a sound far off. Queer-looking little thing, one of the men said. Wonder what it eats, or if we can eat it. He began to chuckle. The first cut him off hard. Shut up! His face had an odd shine to it, as though a thin film of perspiration was about to break through. I... The words only half formed. He knew what he wanted to say, but he could not. The thing before him was a beast of the woods, a dumb thing with neither mind nor manner. Still, he was certain it was... He could hardly form the thought. Speaking to him. Strange words with a strange tone. Words and thoughts of 1,000,000 years. The thoughts of an entire race. A race that had never left its world, that had never climbed from the dirt, and yet was sublimely happy, tied to its world and at peace with the universe. The first mate had been in space 18 years. He had grown hard fighting for the mapping command, and it had been many more years than he could remember since he had cried. But he felt the tears beginning. The thoughts were too sweet, too clear, too demanding in their picturing. Take him to the ship, he said, turning toward the forest. We'll let the captain have a look at him. The men lifted the little beast and carried him back through the foliage. The first mate followed a few feet behind, his head lowered. They wanted to take Wummel to Earth. He could hear them saying it in the caverns of their minds. The thought came strongest from the man they called the captain. He thought, and the thoughts came to Wummel, and Wummel listened, but he could only listen at first. To Earth, the thought said. To Earth, and the command is saved, and the wandering won't be stopped, and we can go off across the rim and find the last planet ever. Then we can come back. But till they find the last planet, there will be movement. These were thoughts lower than thoughts. They were buried deeper, deeper than the fibers knew they reached, buried down where this captain could never really see them, only feel the burning of their message in his legs. And he moved, always moved, without rest, constantly driven on, with no sleep, with no rest, no ending. Wummel felt the heart in him go out to these strange beasts of the eternally nighted sky. They were terrible in their everlasting wandering. Even the home world was to them merely a base to which they could return occasionally. Now they wanted to take him from his home. Wummel considered it, the chill spreading up from his spine. He knew he was as deeply rooted to Ruska as the Sulan or the gnarl bushes. Could it be conceivable that he might go and never return? Wummel found it difficult to live on his world, sometimes. The land beasts were huge, hungry, and fearsome. The prowl cats and the citazil were always on the hunt, and Wummel's people had never quite learned to avoid them. For the land beasts were not precisely ignorant brutes. They had minds and souls, Wummel imagined, and their actions could not always be predicted. It was better that way. Then, too, there was the sucking valley where the mud ran up over the walls of the canyon and dragged down those unlucky enough to be blown there during the time of winds. There were many things that made life hard for the Ruskind, but it was good, too. It was good when the triple moons rose in blue and fire red and white. Then the coolness came, when the long magenta blossoms of the alu broke forth and shot many feet into the air, showering all the hills till they were carpeted bright and happy with the color. And most of all, Wummel loved the sighing, whispering, chortling winds that blew to him from beyond the mountains. He had often wanted to go there, beyond the stark black mountains, and see the wind lord who made the happy puffs that became the wind. They wanted to take him from that, all that, and send him hurtling through a black and a dead and a night so deep that no man and no Ruskind would ever see to its far end. He knew of the stars. He had seen them. His people spoke of them, but not to go there. Never that. They wanted to make a wanderer of him. They wanted him for show and study on their own base world, their Earth. They wanted to cast him from his home and set him, as they did, wandering on that star road that never ended, but twisted and wound in among the eternal graves of the beings that had wandered to their deaths. The tears, thick and oily, started to Wummel's eyes, even as the Earthmen let the big plug door sigh shut, blocking away the light of Ruska, and the bolts thrust home. Then he felt the shivering and the roaring and the hungry urgency of the metal itself as the ship pleaded to the men, thundered its desire to go and never return, never stop again on this world of the three moons and the blue, blue seas and the razor-toothed mountains and the winds blowing from beyond those mountains, never come again, and never. The takeoff was a sloppy one. Somehow the tapes had been fed in with a bit too much fervency, as though the drive master had wanted away from the tiny world. Captain Kovacic stood with his back to the little cage. He stood watching through the viewport as the multicolored world dropped away under them till it was a picture drawn on a blackboard. He felt the thoughts bubbling up in him, and he turned reluctantly. He stared at the little green creature, huddled into a ball, its huge eyes staring. The creature was shivering, mocking the quivers of the ship itself. Kovacic felt that had the being possessed eyelids, it would surely have had them screwed tightly, painfully shut. The thoughts roiled and swirled like dirty oil on an angry sea, and he felt the rising of his own longing in his throat, a longing he had never actually known he possessed. He knew, with a startling burst of clarity, the writing in the Book of the Ancestors. He knew of the Ruskind and of the roots that grow deeper, far deeper, than the mere roots of race. He knew he was a wanderer, that all his people were wanderers, and how they would end. He knew, too, what he had done to Wummel. He watched as the little creature's golden eyes frosted over, and its fur ceased quivering. The first mate had not wanted to come to the bridge. He had known the creature was there, and he had not relished the ideas and disturbing thoughts the being seemed to create. But he came, because he knew the progress report must be delivered, At all times, the captain must know how far they had come, how fast they were going, how soon they would arrive. All the information of running. When he stepped onto the bridge, he saw only the captain's back and the blind, blank, black face of the viewport. The captain had deaded it. Space was cut off for the first time since the ship had been launched. "Captain?" His voice was a softness, as though all the fragile glass and spiderweb of the silence hanging between them might shatter. "It died," Kovacic said, staring straight ahead into nowhere. "Died? The specimen? How? What could have—" "It couldn't live away from the planet. We broke its heart. It's that simple. Laugh if you want. Breaking its heart. But it died, that's all. And now we'll go home. Home." He said the last word with an odd, thick sound, as though it had been something he had known so very long ago and forgotten, and substituted another meaning for it, and now suddenly had learned what it was again, and knew he was damned because it was beyond him forever. "The command, it'll get swallowed by the mercantile," the first began, fumblingly. The captain whirled, his face half angry, half imploring. "Don't you understand, Charlie? Don't you know? You ran away from the creature. You must have heard what it said. Don't you see? The command, the mercantile guilds, Earth, the searching, the always hungering for more, 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 more." He ground to a stop, as though it all meant what he said it meant. Empty nothing. Then he said the one thing that did matter. He said it knowing he was sounding the one truth that was inescapable, the one truth that Wummel had died because he knew had been deprived him. There is no home if there is no rest. There is no rest if there is no home. Then he turned back to the viewport. The first mate moved to leave, but the soft words of the captain, spoken against the deaded surface, stopped all movement. Staring at the empty surface, he murmured, "It died, and the last thing it felt—" He paused. "It pitied us, Charlie. That's all. It didn't hate us for killing it. It just pitied us." You've been listening to pre-1990s speculative fiction readings with a highlight on science fiction by Darrell T. Smith II. Please consider clicking the donation link in the description box. Thank you so much for your time and your imagination.